The morning of November 12, 1997 began like any other autumn day in Lexington, Kentucky. Crisp air carried the scent of fallen leaves across the quiet streets as dawn broke over the small community. But by 7:15 a.m., this ordinary Monday would be forever seared into the town's memory. Dispatch, we have a 1055 on Maple Creek Road. Officer down. Repeat, officer down. Detective Miles Barrett. A 15-year veteran of the Lexington Police Department was found slumped over the steering wheel of his patrol truck, parked on a secluded street just 3 blocks from the station. A single bullet had pierced his temple, his service weapon still holstered at his side. No signs of struggle, no evidence of robbery, just the still body of one of Lexington's most respected detectives, murdered in cold blood while on duty. What would unfold from this devastating discovery would haunt Lexington for more than 2 decades. A murder investigation that led nowhere, a killer who vanished without a trace. A community left wondering if a dangerous predator walked freely among them. And perhaps most disturbing, the growing suspicion that someone within their trusted police department might know more than they were saying. For 22 years, the Barrett murder case collected dust in the cold case files. His widow stopped receiving calls from detectives. His children grew up without answers. The town of Lexington learned to live with an open wound until 2020, when advanced ballistics technology finally matched a weapon to the bullet that killed Miles Barrett. The arrest that followed sent shockwaves through not just Lexington, but police departments across America, because the person who pulled the trigger wasn't a hardened criminal or a vengeful suspect from Merritt's past. It was someone who wore the same badge, someone who had attended Barrett's funeral, consoled his family, and helped investigate his murder for years. Before I reveal the twisted web of corruption, betrayal, and the ultimate abuse of power that led to Detective Barrett's death, take a second to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. This channel brings you the most shocking true crime cases that mainstream media often overlooks. And I don't want you to miss a single one. Today's story exposes how the very system designed to protect us can sometimes harbor the darkest secrets. How a killer hid behind a badge for more than 2 decades. And how justice, though delayed, finally caught up in a way no one in Lexington could have imagined. Have you ever lived in a town where everyone knows everyone? Where local police officers are familiar faces you see at the grocery store or your kids' baseball games? Let me know in the comments below. Because in Lexington, Kentucky, that close-knit community would soon discover that the monster they feared wasn't hiding in the shadows. He was standing right beside them in broad daylight. Miles Barrett wasn't just any detective in the Lexington Police Department. He was the detective everyone in town seemed to know by name. At 42, Barrett had the kind of reputation officers spend their entire careers trying to build. He'd joined the force straight out of college. A local boy who'd played quarterback for Lexington High before getting his criminal justice degree at the University of Kentucky. Barrett rose through the ranks quickly, making detective by 30. His colleagues described him as methodical, persistent, and fair. Barrett never saw cases. He saw people, said Captain Robert Harden, who supervised Barrett for 8 years. Victims weren't just file numbers to him. He carried their stories home. The Barrett family was deeply woven into Lexington's fabric. Barrett and his wife, Charlotte, had been high school sweethearts who married young. Their 3 children, Jason, 16, Annie, 14, and Billy, 11, were active in school sports and community events. The Barrett lived in a modest 2-story home on Sycamore Drive, where Barrett spent weekends coaching Little League and hosting neighborhood barbecues. Everyone knew Barrett, said Diane Powell, who owned the local diner where Barrett got coffee every morning. He'd remember your kids' names, ask about your mom's health. He wasn't just a cop, he was part of this town's backbone. But what made Detective Barrett particularly notable within the department was his reputation for integrity. In 1996, he had led an internal investigation into evidence mishandling that resulted in the resignation of 2 officers. More recently, he'd been assigned to a joint task force with the DEA investigating a suspected drug trafficking operation with possible connections to local officials. Barrett was old school, said retired Officer Tom Kendall. He believed wearing the badge meant something sacred. If you weren't upholding that standard, he didn't care if you were his best friend. He'd call you out. The morning Barrett was murdered, he had been scheduled to meet with the district attorney at 9:00 a.m. According to phone records later obtained by investigators, Barrett had made a call to DA Richard Simmons at 11:42 p.m. the night before, lasting approximately 8 minutes. Simmons would later tell investigators that Barrett had mentioned having something significant to discuss, but didn't elaborate further. The crime scene itself presented immediate puzzles to investigators. Barrett was discovered by Officer Patricia Ramirez, who noticed his truck during her morning patrol. The vehicle was parked in a residential area on Maple Creek Road, a quiet street lined with oak trees and middle-class homes. It wasn't on Barrett's typical route home, nor was it in an area where he had any active cases. The position of the vehicle suggested it had been parked deliberately, not in haste, noted the initial police report. The engine was off, the doors were locked, Barrett's seatbelt was unbuckled, but there were no signs of forced entry or struggle. The most disturbing aspect was the precision of the killing. A single bullet had entered Barrett's right temple, consistent with a medium-caliber handgun fired at close range. The medical examiner would later determine that death had been instantaneous, occurring between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m., hours before the body was discovered. Barrett's service weapon remained holstered and secured. His wallet contained $43 and all his credit cards. His watch and wedding ring were still on his body. His police radio was turned on, but set to the wrong channel, something colleagues insisted Barrett would never do. When the crime scene unit processed the patrol truck, they found Barrett's fingerprints on the steering wheel and door handle as expected. But strangely, there were almost no other prints, not even in places where they should have been, suggesting someone had carefully wiped surfaces clean. No shell casings were recovered at the scene. No murder weapon was found, despite an extensive search of the surrounding area. The bullet recovered during autopsy was determined to be a .40 caliber, but was too damaged for more specific ballistic identification using the technology available in 1997. The news of Barrett's murder spread through Lexington like wildfire. By noon, flowers had begun appearing at the police station entrance. Within 48 hours, a candlelight vigil drew nearly 1,000 people to the town square, roughly a quarter of Lexington's population. This community is in shock. Mayor Thomas Graham told reporters at a press conference the day after the murder, "Detective Barrett represented the very best of our town and our police force. We will not rest until his killer is brought to justice." Inside the department, reactions were complex. On the surface, there was the expected outrage and determination. Chief Raymond Parker immediately assigned 8 detectives to the case and requested assistance from the Kentucky State Police. A reward of $50,000 was quickly established for information leading to an arrest. But behind closed doors, tensions emerged. Some officers questioned why Barrett had been in that location at that hour. Others wondered about his recent behavior, which a few colleagues described as distracted and secretive in the weeks before his death. Barrett had been keeping things close to the vest, admitted Detective Marcus Sullivan, Barrett's partner of 3 years. He'd been working late, making calls from Paines's instead of the station. I asked him about it once, and he just said some cases needed extra precaution. The investigation quickly established that Barrett had left the station around 10:15 p.m. the night before his body was found. Security footage showed him walking to his truck alone, carrying a manila folder that was not found at the crime scene. His home phone record showed no outgoing calls after the one to the DA at 11:42 p.m. Charlotte. Barrett told investigators that Barrett had texted her around 10:30 p.m. saying he needed to follow up on something and would be late. This wasn't unusual given his workload. She had fallen asleep by midnight and hadn't heard him come home. The lack of witnesses proved especially frustrating. Despite the residential location, not one neighbor reported hearing a gunshot. No suspicious vehicles were seen in the area. Security cameras on nearby businesses had either been turned off for the night or positioned away from the scene. "It's like the perfect crime," Detective Sullivan told the case review team 3 weeks into the investigation. "No witnesses, no evidence, no apparent motive. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing and how to cover their tracks." By December 1997, investigators had interviewed 122 people, including family members, colleagues, individuals from Merritt's active and closed cases, and residents near the crime scene. They'd executed 17 search warrants and analyzed Merritt's case files, personal emails, and phone records, and yet they were no closer to identifying a suspect than the day the body was found. The most disturbing possibility, Captain Hardin acknowledged in a confidential department memo, is that this wasn't a random killing or even a revenge hit from someone Barrett put away. The precision, the cleanup, the lack of evidence, it has all the hallmarks of a professional job, or worse, someone with law enforcement knowledge. This unthinkable suggestion that one of their own might be involved would hang like a shadow over the department for years to come. But without evidence, it remained just that. A disturbing theory among many, as the case that shook Lexington to its core slowly began its long journey into the cold case files. By late November 1997, the Merritt investigation had become the largest in Lexington's history. Chief Parker established a dedicated task force, commandeering the department's conference room and transforming it into a war room plastered with timelines, photographs, and suspect profiles. State police investigators joined local detectives, bringing fresh eyes to the rapidly accumulating evidence. The task force's first priority was establishing a list of potential suspects. Given Barrett's career putting away criminals, the list grew quickly. When an officer is killed, especially a detective with Merritt's history, you start with those who had reason to hate him, explained Lieutenant Daniel Harrison, who headed the task force. And Barrett had put away some dangerous people over the years. Top of the list was Marcus Delgado, a drug dealer Barrett had helped convict in 1995. Delgado had been released from prison just 3 months before the murder and had reportedly told his cellmate he would make Merritt pay. When investigators located Delgado, he was living in Louisville, nearly 80 miles away. Although he lacked a solid alibi for the night of the murder, cell tower records later confirmed his phone had been in Louisville all night. Still, he remained a person of interest for months. Another compelling suspect emerged in Raymond Tate, a former police academy cadet who had been expelled after Barrett reported him for cheating on qualification exams. Tate had subsequently failed to find work in law enforcement and had been vocal about blaming Barrett for ruining his career. Interviews with Tate's neighbors confirmed he harbored significant resentment, often mentioning Barrett during drinking binges. However, Tate had been at an overnight shift at the factory where he worked when Barrett was killed, with multiple witnesses confirming his presence. The task force also investigated Carl Hoffman, the brother of a domestic violence victim whose case Barrett had handled. Hoffman had confronted Barrett at the courthouse 6 months earlier, accusing him of not doing enough to protect his sister. The confrontation had become heated enough that courthouse security had intervened. Yet when questioned, Hoffman was devastated by the news of Barrett's death and voluntarily submitted to a polygraph test, which he passed convincingly. "We ran down every lead, no matter how unlikely," said Detective Melissa Jordan, one of the task force members. Former suspects, jilted informants, angry relatives of victims, colleagues with grudges, anyone who might have had it out for Silas. By December, investigators had administered 12 polygraph tests, executed 23 search warrants, and collected DNA samples from 16 individuals. None produced matches to trace evidence found in Barrett's vehicle. Then came what seemed like the first real break in the case. A witness came forward, Brady Thompson, a college student who claimed he had been taking a shortcut through Maple Creek Road around midnight on the night of the murder and had seen a tall man in dark clothing standing next to a police vehicle. The witness seemed credible initially, Lieutenant Harrison recalled. He provided details about the location that weren't public knowledge, and his timing aligned with our established timeline. The task force worked with Thompson to create a composite sketch of the man he claimed to have seen. Their resulting image was distributed throughout Lexington and to neighboring departments. For 3 weeks, the sketch dominated local news coverage and generated dozens of tips. But as investigators dug deeper into Thompson's story, inconsistencies emerged. His initial description of the vehicle didn't match Merritt's truck model. When pressed on these discrepancies, Thompson revised his statement multiple times. Eventually, he admitted to fabricating the entire account after learning about the reward money. "That false lead cost us over 200 man-hours," Harrison said. "Resources we couldn't afford to waste." Meanwhile, forensic analysis of the bullet recovered during Merritt's autopsy provided limited insights. The .40 caliber round was consistent with several common law enforcement and civilian handguns. Ballistics experts determined it had likely been fired from a Glock or similar weapon, not particularly helpful given how common such firearms were, especially among police officers. The autopsy revealed another puzzling detail. Residue patterns suggested the gun had been fired approximately 2 in from Barrett's head, indicating the killer had been inside the vehicle or reaching through the window. Yet there were no signs of forced entry, implying Barrett had either unlocked the door for his killer or the person had a key to the vehicle. This suggested Barrett knew his killer. Captain Harden noted in a confidential report. He either let them into his truck voluntarily or was surprised by someone he had no reason to fear. This theory led investigators to take a closer look at Barrett's recent cases and contacts. They discovered that in the 6 months before his death, Barrett had been unusually active in requesting old case files from the evidence room, particularly relating to drug arrests from 1992-1994. The log showed he had checked out 17 files, most of which were found in his desk drawer after his death, except for 3 which remained missing. Attempts to establish what Barrett had been investigating hit walls of bureaucracy and selective memory. His notes were typically meticulous, but his desk and home office contained no documentation related to these old cases. His personal laptop had been thoroughly wiped just days before his death using professional-grade software, something the tech-savvy detective certainly knew how to do, but which raised obvious questions about what he had been hiding and from whom. The task force then focused on Barrett's final day. His movements had been tracked until approximately 10:30 p.m. when security cameras showed him leaving a convenience store where he'd purchased coffee. Between that time and when his body was discovered the following morning, his whereabouts were unknown. His cell phone record showed a final outgoing call at 11:38 p.m. to a prepaid phone that had never been used before or since that single call. The call lasted 4 minutes and 26 seconds. The prepaid phone had been purchased with cash at a Walmart in neighboring Scott County 2 weeks earlier. Security footage from the store had already been overwritten by the time investigators identified the purchase. That phone call is the smoking gun, Detective Jordan insisted during a task force meeting in January 1999. Barrett calls this burner phone. And less than an hour later, he's dead. He was lured to Maple Creek Road by whoever was on the other end of that line. But who had he called and why? 3 months into the investigation, the task force faced an uncomfortable reality. They were running out of leads. The case that had begun with such intensity was losing momentum. The overtime budget had been exhausted. Media coverage had dwindled. The reward money had generated dozens of false tips, but no actionable information. We're missing something. Lieutenant Harrison told his team during what would be one of their final daily briefings. Barrett was working on something significant, something he didn't trust to official channels. Whatever it was got him killed. By April 1999, the task force was officially disbanded with just Harrison and Jordan assigned to continue the investigation part-time. By the 1-year anniversary of Barrett's death, the case had been relegated to monthly review status. By 2001, it was officially classified as cold. Charlotte Barrett, who had been a constant presence at the police station in the early months, gradually stopped coming by for updates. The annual memorial service for Barrett, which had drawn hundreds in the first year, dwindled to just family and close colleagues by the 5th anniversary. The hardest part wasn't just losing Silas. Charlotte would later tell a reporter on the 10th anniversary of his death. It was watching the world forget him, watching the investigation fade away with no answers. For the detectives who had worked the case, the failure to solve Barrett's murder became a professional wound that never fully healed. In our line of work, you accept that some cases go unsolved, said Detective Jordan, who kept a photo of Merritt on her desk until her retirement in 2015. But not this one. Not one of our own. Somewhere out there, someone got away with killing a cop. And worse, they've been living with that secret for years. Little did she know that the truth was much closer and much more disturbing than anyone had imagined. Before I continue with how this seemingly perfect crime finally unraveled after more than 2 decades, I want to ask you to take a second to hit that like button and consider subscribing to the channel. Your support helps me continue bringing these forgotten cases to light and sharing their stories that might otherwise remain buried in dusty file cabinets. And I'm curious, what time is it where you're watching from? Drop it in the comments below. It always amazes me how these stories connect people across different time zones, different cities, sometimes even different countries. While you're typing that out, let's get back to Lexington, Kentucky, where the Merritt case was about to enter a long, cold hibernation that would last nearly 20 years. As the new millennium dawned over Lexington, the Merritt case receded from headlines into legend. The kind of local tragedy that parents whispered about after children went to bed. The once bustling task force room was eventually repurposed. The tip line, which once rang constantly, was disconnected. The dedicated email address forwarded TOA General Cold Case Inbox, rarely checked by overworked detectives. For Lexington, the unsolved murder of Detective Barrett left an invisible scar on the community's psyche. The small-town sense of security, already fragile, seemed permanently altered. "You'd see it in little ways," recalled Reverend Jason Collins, who had presided over Barrett's funeral. People started locking their doors more. Parents became more protective of their children. There was this unspoken fear that if someone could kill a detective and get away with it, none of us were truly safe. Local businesses that once stayed open late began closing earlier. The park near Maple Creek Road, where the body had been discovered, saw a dramatic decrease in visitors. The city eventually renovated it, adding bright lighting and security cameras, but residents still referred to it as Merritt Park, a grim reminder rather than an honor. The murder changed Lexington in less visible ways, too. Town council meetings became forums for demanding more police presence. The annual budget increasingly prioritized public safety. When a new police station was built in 2005, Thesity included a memorial wall featuring Barrett's badge and photograph prominently displayed in the lobby. "It was like the case became part of our identity," said Elaine Davis, who taught history at Lexington High School. "Every year when I covered local history with my students, the Barrett murder would inevitably come up. These were kids who weren't even born when it happened, but they knew the story. For the Barrett family, the years without answers brought a unique kind of suffering. Charlotte Barrett, once a vibrant presence in community events, withdrew from public life after the second anniversary memorial service. Cher turned to teaching at Lexington Elementary, but requested a transfer to third grade after finding it too painful to work with fifth graders, the age her youngest son had been when Barrett was killed. "My mom changed," said Jason Barrett, who was 16 when his father was murdered. In a rare interview given in 2010, he described the aftermath. "She was always looking, always wondering if she'd pass the killer on the street. Every anniversary, every birthday, every Christmas without Dad. It was like experiencing the loss all over again, but with this added weight of not knowing why or who." The Merritt children each processed their father's death differently. Jason followed his father's footsteps into law enforcement, graduating from the police academy in 2004 and joining the Louisville PD rather than Lexington. "I couldn't work in those hallways knowing Dad's killer might still be there," he explained. Annie, the middle child, pursued a law degree and eventually became a prosecutor specializing in cold cases. The youngest, Billy, struggled most visibly. Trouble in school led to a stint in juvenile detention before he eventually found stability as a substance abuse counselor. Dad's case was always there. "This ghost following us," Annie Barrett told a journalist on the 15th anniversary of the murder. "We each had to decide whether to run from it or chase it. I chose to chase." Indeed, the Barrett family became their own investigators over the years. Charlotte kept meticulous files in a dedicated room of their home, what the children called the Silas Room. She collected newspaper clippings, recorded TV segments, and maintained correspondence with detectives. Every year on the anniversary of Silas's death, she would call the Lexington PD to inquire about any new developments. Eventually, her calls were routed directly to the cold case unit. "Mrs. Barrett never gave up," said Detective Jordan, who maintained contact with the family long after the case went cold. She'd send Christmas cards to the department every year with the same message. "Please remember Barrett," as if we could forget. The Barrett family's persistence extended beyond mere inquiry. They established a scholarship in Barrett's name. At the local community college for students pursuing criminal justice degrees, they organized annual fundraisers to maintain and increase the reward money, which grew to $125,000 by 2010. And perhaps most significantly, they funded private forensic testing of evidence when police budget constraints prevented new analyses. Meanwhile, the Lexington Police Department underwent substantial changes in the wake of Barrett's unsolved murder. Chief Parker retired in 2001, succeeded by Deputy Chief James Thornton, who had been a patrol officer alongside Barrett in the early days. Thornton implemented sweeping reforms, including mandatory partner protocols for detectives and enhanced vehicle tracking systems. Silas's death exposed vulnerabilities in our procedures, Thornton acknowledged during his swearing-in ceremony. No officer should ever be as isolated as he was that night. In 2003, an internal affairs investigation revealed concerning irregularities in the evidence handling of the Merritt case. 3 items collected from the crime scene, a coffee cup, a notepad, and Barrett's personal cell phone had been improperly stored, potentially compromising their evidentiary value. The officer responsible evidence technician, Roy Simmons, received a formal reprimand, though the investigation found no evidence of deliberate tampering. This incident prompted a complete overhaul of the department's evidence management protocols. The aging evidence room was renovated. Digital tracking systems replaced paper logs and surveillance cameras were installed throughout the storage areas. "We had to restore trust," said Captain Lisa Winters, who supervised the evidence room modernization, both within the department and with the public. Every officer still wondered if one of their colleagues had something to do with Barrett's death. That kind of suspicion corrodes a department from within. The composition of the department itself changed dramatically over the 2 decades following Barrett's murder. By 2018, only 6 officers remained who had worked directly with Merritt. Retirement, transfers, and natural attrition gradually replaced institutional memory with officers who knew of Barrett only through training materials and annual memorial services. For the newer officers, Merritt became almost mythological, explained Sergeant Kevin Rodriguez, who joined the force in 2010. His case was taught at the academy as a lesson in both investigative procedures and officer safety, but there was always this unspoken question: was the killer still among us? This question gained new relevance as forensic science advanced by leaps and bounds in the early 2000s. DNA analysis, still in its relative infancy during the initial investigation, had evolved significantly. Techniques allowing for analysis of smaller samples, degraded evidence, and touched DNA created new possibilities for cold cases. In 2008, the Kentucky State Police established an advanced cold case unit with enhanced laboratory capabilities. The Barrett case was among the first submitted for re-evaluation using these new technologies. Trace DNA was recovered from the steering wheel of Barrett's vehicle, DNA that had been present but undetectable using 1997 techniques. However, the sample was insufficient for traditional DNA profiling methods of the time. Ballistics technology saw a similarly dramatic advancement. The Integrated Ballistics Identification System, IBIS, which digitally cataloged the unique markings guns leave on fired bullets, expanded nationwide. By 2012, the database contained information from millions of weapons, creating unprecedented opportunities for matching bullets to guns, even years after crimes occurred. Digital forensics emerged as an entirely new field. Barrett's damaged cell phone, long considered of limited evidentiary value, became potentially crucial as new methods developed for recovering data from compromised devices. In 2015, specialists managed to extract partial text messages from the phone's memory, messages that had been deleted shortly before Barrett's death. One fragmentary message sent to an unknown recipient read only, "Confirm what we suspected. Need to meet the usual place. Midnight." That message was tantalizing, said Detective Jordan, who had by then transferred to the cold case unit. It suggested Barrett had been investigating something confidentially, something he didn't trust to official channels. But without knowing who he sent it to, we couldn't move forward. The digital revolution provided avenues for investigation as well. Social media, which didn't exist when Barrett was killed, created new ways to reach potential witnesses. The department launched annual appeals on the anniversary of Barrett's death, reaching thousands more people than traditional media ever could. These appeals occasionally generated tips, though none proved substantial until 2017, when an anonymous online submission mentioned seeing Barrett arguing with another officer outside a storage facility 2 days before the murder. The tip included details never released to the public, giving it immediate credibility. However, the submitter never responded to follow-up requests, and the storage facility had changed ownership twice in the intervening years with no surveillance records maintained. By 2019, the Merritt case had been reopened and shelved so many times that many in the department viewed it as unsolvable. The physical evidence had been examined using every available technology. Witnesses had been interviewed and reinterred, Suspects had been cleared or had died themselves. 21 years is an eternity in a homicide investigation, explained forensic scientist Dr. Rebecca Torres in a 2019 documentary about unsolved Kentucky murders. Memories fade, evidence degrades, witnesses move away or pass on. With each passing year, the chances of resolution diminish exponentially. Yet sometimes, as Lexington would soon discover, justice doesn't follow statistical probabilities. Sometimes it just needs one technological breakthrough, one persistent investigator, or one piece of overlooked evidence to suddenly illuminate decades of darkness. January 2020 arrived with little fanfare in Lexington. The Merritt case had reached its 22nd year unsolved, an anniversary that now passed with minimal public acknowledgement. The annual press release from the police department had become a perfunctory exercise, identical year after year, except for updating the reward amount, which had reached $150,000. Detective Allison Reed wasn't supposed to be working on the Merritt case at all. As the newest member of Lexington's 3-person cold case unit, she had been assigned to a series of unsolved robberies from 2010, cases with living victims and considerably more physical evidence. But Reed, just 31 and eager to prove herself, had developed an after-hours obsession with the department's most infamous unsolved murder. "I grew up in Lexington," Reed would later explain. "The Merritt case was like our local ghost story. My dad was a patrol officer when it happened. I remember him coming home that morning white as a sheet, saying as someone got Silas, it felt personal, even though I never met Detective Barrett." Reed's interest might have remained just that. An interest, if not for a chance encounter at a regional law enforcement conference in Nashville that February. There she attended a presentation by Dr. Marcus Whitman, a ballistics expert from the FBI's Quantitative Analysis Unit. Whitman was showcasing a revolutionary imaging technology called topographic bullet identification. TBI, traditional ballistics comparison, is limited by what the human eye can see. Even with microscopes, Whitman explained to the audience, TBI creates three-dimensional models of bullets and casings at a microscopic level, measuring striations no human could detect. We can match bullets to weapons with unprecedented accuracy, even with severely damaged samples. Reed approached Whitman after the presentation, explaining her interest in the Merritt case and the damaged bullet that had never been conclusively matched to any weapon. Whitman was familiar with the case. It had been featured in forensic textbooks as an example of the limitations of traditional ballistics analysis. "Bring me the bullet," Whitman told her. No promises, but this is exactly the kind of case TBI was designed for. Back in Lexington, Reed faced her first obstacle, bureaucracy. The Merritt evidence was considered sacred within the department. Requesting its release required approval from Chief Anthony Davis, who had joined the force years after Barrett's death, but understood the case's significance. "You want to remove our only physical evidence and transport it to Quantico?" Davis asked when Reed presented her request. "Evidence that's been examined by every ballistics expert in Kentucky over the past 2 decades. Reed was persistent. "With respect, sir, not with this technology. TBI didn't exist until 2018, and it's only been available to field offices since last year." After 2 weeks of deliberation and consultation with the Merritt family, Davis approved the request. In early March 2020, Reed personally transported the bullet to the FBI's laboratory in Quantico, Virginia. The initial TBI scan took less than 6 hours. Whitman's team created a digital model of the bullet, revealing microscopic details that had been invisible to previous examinations. The results were promising, but inconclusive. To identify the weapon, they would need to compare these unique markings against a database of known firearms. "This is where we hit another wall," Reed recalled. The FBI's database contained millions of weapons, but there was no guarantee Barrett's killer's gun was among them. We needed to narrow the search parameters. Reed returned to Lexington and began what colleagues called her ballistic census. She proposed that every firearm owned by current and former Lexington police officers be voluntarily submitted for test firing and TBI analysis. Her reasoning was simple, but compelling. If Barrett had been killed by someone with law enforcement connections, as long suspected, the murder weapon might still be in possession of a current or former officer. The request was unprecedented and controversial. The police union initially objected, citing privacy concerns. Some officers openly questioned whether such a drastic step was justified for a 2-decade-old case. Others wondered if Reed was engaging in a publicity stunt to advance her career. Here's where I need to ask a favor. If you're finding this deep dive into one of America's most complex cold cases valuable, please take a second to hit that subscribe button right now. I spend hundreds of hours researching these cases, conducting interviews, and piecing together the truth behind these forgotten crimes. Your subscription helps make that possible and ensures you never miss an upload. Now, let's get back to how Detective Reed's bold strategy unfolded. Despite the resistance, Chief Davis backed Reed's request, making it clear that while the testing would be voluntary, refusal might raise questions. The department's leadership team was the first to submit their weapons, creating momentum. Within 3 weeks, 87% of current officers had participated. Their service weapons and personal firearms documented and test-fired. The FBI created TBI profiles for each, comparing them against the Merritt bullet. No matches were found. Reed then expanded the census to retired officers. This proved more challenging as many had moved away or died. Some had sold their weapons or transferred them to family members. Nevertheless, by May 2020, nearly 200 additional firearms had been tested. Still no match. I was starting to think we'd misread the situation entirely, Reed admitted. Maybe it wasn't a cop after all. Maybe we'd wasted months pursuing the wrong angle. Then came a breakthrough from an unexpected source. Charlotte Barrett, going through her husband's personal effects in preparation for donating them to the police museum, discovered a small notebook hidden in the lining of an old briefcase. The notebook contained cryptic entries, mostly initials and numbers, but one page held a clear reference. DS Glock SNWTF1, 194, DS, Daniel Slater, a name that sent immediate shockwaves through the department. Lieutenant Daniel Slater had been one of the department's most respected officers, serving for 31 years before retiring in 2012 with full honors. More significantly, he had been part of the original Merritt murder task force, one of the lead investigators assigned to find his colleague's killer. The serial number in Barrett's notebook corresponded to a weapon Slater had reported stolen in 1997, a year before Barrett's murder. According to department records, Slater had filed a report claiming his off-duty weapon, a Glock 23, had been taken during a home burglary while he was on vacation. Barrett had somehow connected Slater to something suspicious. Reed theorized. He'd noted the serial number of a gun that supposedly no longer existed. Reed immediately requested a search of national gun registration databases. Had Slater's stolen gun ever resurfaced? The answer came back negative. The weapon had never been recovered, used in another crime, or re-registered. With this new lead, Reed obtained a search warrant for Slater's residence, now a lakeside retirement home about 40 miles outside Lexington. The 68-year-old former lieutenant was reportedly surprised but cooperative when investigators arrived at his door. The initial search revealed nothing unusual. No hidden weapons, no incriminating evidence. Slater maintained he hadn't seen his stolen Glock since 1997 and had no idea. Why would Barrett have noted its serial number? Then, on the second day of the search, an agent noticed something odd about Slater's boat dock. One of the support posts seemed newer than the others. When tapped, it produced a hollow sound. Inside, wrapped in waterproof material and sealed in concrete, was a Glock 23 handgun. The serial number matched the one in Merritt's notebook. Within hours, the weapon was transported to Quantico for TBI analysis. The results came back within days. The unique microscopic markings on the test bullets, fired from Slater's Glock, matched those on the bullet that killed Miles Barrett with 99.8% certainty. It was as close to a perfect match as ballistics can produce. Dr. Whitman would later testify. There is no reasonable doubt that this weapon fired the bullet that killed Detective Barrett. On June 8, 2020, Daniel Slater was arrested and charged with the first-degree murder of Detective Silas Barrett. The news sent shockwaves through Lexington and the law enforcement community nationwide. Here was not just a fellow officer, but one who had helped investigate the very murder he had committed. A betrayal so profound it defied comprehension. The evidence against Slater quickly mounted. A search of his financial records revealed a series of suspicious deposits between 1996 and 1997, totaling over $200,000, inconsistent with his police salary. Digital forensics experts recovered deleted emails between Slater and several known drug traffickers dating back to 95. Most damning was the recovery of Barrett's missing notebook and cell phone found buried on Slater's hunting property in a waterproof container. The notebook contained detailed documentation of what Barrett had uncovered. Slater had been providing protection and intelligence to a drug trafficking operation moving product through Kentucky, using his position to steer investigations away from his criminal associates. Barrett was building a case. Chief Davis explained at a press conference following Slater's arrest. He discovered corruption in our midst and was preparing to expose it. For that, he paid with his life. Investigators reconstructed the events of November 11th, 1997. Barrett had arranged to meet Slater, possibly to confront him with evidence or to give him a chance to turn himself in. Instead, Slater seized the opportunity to silence the one man who could destroy him. Using his familiarity with police procedure, he executed Barrett with a single shot, wiped down the scene, and removed incriminating evidence. For 22 years, he had lived free. Not just free, but respected, honored, as one of the dedicated investigators who tried to solve the case. He had attended Merritt family functions, consoled Charlotte, watched Barrett's children grow up, all while knowing he was responsible for their pain. "The audacity is what's truly staggering," Reed said. He didn't run. He didn't hide. He stood at Barrett's grave during memorial services. He looked his widow in the eye and promised they'd find who did this. The level of deception is almost incomprehensible. The revelation that Barrett's killer had been hiding in plain sight, wearing the same badge and uniform, forced Lexington to confront uncomfortable questions about trust, accountability, and institutional failure. Would you have suspected someone inside the department? Tell me in the comments. Were there signs that should have been noticed earlier? Could this betrayal have been prevented? These questions haunted not just Lexington, but police departments nationwide. As the Merritt case transformed from a cautionary tale about unsolved crimes to a stark warning about the enemy within, the arrest of Daniel Slater unfolded with surgical precision. On a clear June morning in 2020, as the former lieutenant stepped onto his boat dock for a day of fishing, he found himself surrounded by FBI agents and Kentucky State Police. According to witnesses, Slater showed no emotion as the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. No surprise, no anger, no fear. Only when reporters' cameras appeared, his composure briefly crack. "The most telling moment was when they walked him to the car," said neighbor Troy Wilkins, who witnessed the arrest. He didn't look shocked or confused like an innocent man might. He looked resigned, like a man who'd been waiting for this day for 22 years. Within hours, Slater's arrest dominated national headlines. Cable news networks interrupted regular programming. True crime podcasts hastily produced special episodes. For many in Lexington, the revelation brought a complex mix of emotions. Relief that Barrett's killer had finally been identified, but profound betrayal that the murderer had been a respected officer, a wolf hiding among the shepherds. "I worked alongside Dan for 15 years, said retired officer Thomas Kendall. "We shared meals at his house. Our kids played together. To think he could look us in the eye day after day knowing what he'd done. It's beyond comprehension." As Slater was processed at Kentucky State Penitentiary, placed in protective custody due to his former law enforcement status, investigators began the meticulous work of unraveling exactly what Barrett had discovered that had cost him his life. The corruption ran deeper than anyone had imagined. Financial forensics revealed that between 1993 and 1997, Slater had received over $475,000 in unexplained income through a network of shell companies and offshore accounts. The money is traced back to the Cabrera drug cartel, a mid-sized organization that had controlled much of the cocaine and methamphetamine trade in central Kentucky during the 1990s. Slater wasn't just taking bribes, explained FBI financial crime specialist Amanda Torres. He had effectively become the cartel's security director. He provided intelligence on police operations, tipped them off about raids, and actively sabotaged investigations that might have exposed their network. Evidence recovered from Slater's properties painted a disturbing picture. Encrypted files on old hard drives contained detailed police operation plans, with annotations showing how information had been leaked to targets. Ledgers documented payments not just to Slater, but to 3 other officers who had since died or left the department. Most damning was a collection of audio recordings Slater had secretly made of his meetings with cartel representatives. Insurance against betrayal that ultimately helped seal his conviction. "He was meticulous," said prosecutor James Morrison, who led the case against Slater. Everything was documented, categorized, preserved. It's as if he couldn't help approaching his criminal enterprise with the same attention to detail he brought to police work. But what exactly had Barrett discovered that triggered his murder? The answer lay in the recovered notebook found at Slater's hunting property. In the weeks before his death, Barrett had been reviewing seemingly unconnected drug cases from 1994-1997 and noticed a troubling pattern. Investigations that should have succeeded mysteriously collapsed. Confidential informants whose identities were known only to a handful of officers were exposed or disappeared. Major raids yielded empty warehouses despite solid intelligence. Barrett created a matrix, Detective Reed explained during a press briefing. He tracked which officers had access to which information, which operations failed, which succeeded. One name kept appearing at the nexus of the failures: Daniel Slater. The notebook revealed that by November 1997, Barrett had compiled enough circumstantial evidence to justify a formal internal affairs investigation. He had scheduled a meeting with the district attorney for the morning after he was killed. In his briefcase, later found empty in his truck, he had prepared a detailed report outlining his suspicions and evidence. But Barrett had made a fatal miscalculation. 3 days before his murder, he had accessed the department's firearms registry, checking the status of Slater's reported stolen Glock. This digital fingerprint alerted Slater, who monitored such searches using his administrative access. It was the beginning of the end, said Detective Jordan. Once Slater realized Barrett was looking at his weapon record, he knew it was only a matter of time before everything unraveled. Phone records recovered during the investigation revealed that on November 10, 1997, Slater had used a prepaid phone to contact Barrett, suggesting they meet to discuss a confidential matter. Barrett, likely believing Slater was coming forward as a whistleblower about departmental corruption, agreed to meet late on November 11th at a secluded location, Maple Creek Road. Slater exploited Barrett's fundamental decency. Morrison told the jury during the trial he knew Barrett would give a fellow officer the benefit of the doubt, would meet privately to protect the department's reputation, would come alone to preserve confidentiality. Forensic evidence finally completed the picture of what happened that night. Barrett had arrived first, parking his patrol truck on the quiet street. Cell tower data placed Slater's phone in the vicinity at 11:53 p.m. Soil samples from Slater's vehicle matched those from the roadside near where Barrett was parked. The murder itself had been executed with cold precision. Slater approached Barrett's vehicle, likely engaging him in conversation through the driver's side window. At some point he drew his stolen Glock and fired a single shot at close range. He then entered the vehicle, removed Barrett's notebook and personal cell phone, and wiped down surfaces he might have touched. He knew exactly what evidence technicians would look for, explained forensic specialist Dr. Elizabeth Cohen. He knew how to manipulate the crime scene to eliminate evidence while making it appear undisturbed. Perhaps most disturbing was what happened after the murder. Records showed that Slater volunteered for the Merritt investigation task force within hours of the body being discovered. He positioned himself as the liaison to the Merritt family, giving him access to what they knew and what they were told. He personally conducted several key interviews, including those with witnesses who might have seen something relevant. He effectively controlled the narrative from within, said Lieutenant Harrison, who had unknowingly worked alongside Barrett's killer on the task force. Anytime the investigation moved in his direction, he could redirect it. Any evidence pointing to him, he could suppress or discredit. Over the years, Slater had carefully cultivated his image as the dedicated detective haunted by his friend's unsolved murder. He attended every memorial service. He sent holiday cards to the Barrett family. He mentored young officers using lessons he claimed to have learned from Barrett. The performance was masterful, said police psychologist Dr. Rebecca Foster. He didn't just hide his guilt, he transformed himself into the victim's most loyal advocate. It's a level of psychological manipulation rarely seen even in the most disturbed criminal minds. When investigators searched Slater's home after his arrest, they discovered a locked room containing what could only be described as a shrine to his deception. Newspaper clippings about the Barrett case covered one wall. Commendation letters for his work on the investigation were framed. Photos showed him standing beside Charlotte Barrett at various memorial events, his arm around her shoulders in apparent comfort. It wasn't just about getting away with murder, Detective Reed concluded. He seemed to derive satisfaction from the duplicity itself, from being seen as the loyal friend while knowing he was the killer. It was a power trip that lasted 22 years. As the evidence mounted, many wondered how Slater had evaded suspicion for so long. Part of the answer lay in his reputation. Before Barrett's murder, Slater had been considered above reproach, a decorated officer with no disciplinary issues, a family man active in his church, a mentor to younger officers. "No one wanted to believe it could be Dan," said Captain Winters. "Even when the evidence became overwhelming, many of us struggled to reconcile the man we thought we knew with the monster revealed by the investigation." The other factor was Slater's intimate knowledge of police procedure. He understood precisely how homicide investigations worked, knew what evidence would be collected and how, and could anticipate investigative avenues before they were pursued. He didn't just commit a murder, Prosecutor Morrison told the jury in his closing argument. He weaponized his badge, his training, and the trust of his colleagues to commit the perfect crime. And then he spent 22 years hiding in plain sight, watching the family of his victim suffer, all while being celebrated as a dedicated public servant. This level of betrayal demands the most severe punishment our justice system allows. The trial of Daniel Slater began in March 2021, delayed by CO-19 protocols and extensive pretrial motions. The Franklin County Courthouse, where proceedings were moved to ensure an impartial jury, became a media epicenter. Journalists from across the country descended on the small Kentucky community. The courthouse steps grew cluttered with satellite trucks and camera crews. Local hotels reached capacity for the first time since the pandemic began. Inside the courtroom, the prosecution presented a meticulous case spanning 6 weeks. 87 witnesses testified. Over 200 pieces of evidence were introduced. FBI analysts explained the ballistics match. Financial experts traced the money trail. Former drug traffickers now cooperating with authorities detailed their dealings with Slater. Through it all, the defendant sat impassively at the defense table. Slater never showed emotion, noted courtroom sketch artist Diane Parker, not during the most damning testimony. Not when Barrett's family members broke down on the stand. He might as well have been watching a movie about someone else's life. The defense strategy centered on attacking the ballistics evidence, suggesting that the FBI's new technology was unproven and the match inconclusive. They proposed an alternative theory that Barrett had been killed by drug dealers who had subsequently blackmailed Slater, explaining both the murder and his suspicious finances. "It's a convenient story," Prosecutor Morrison told the jury. "But it doesn't explain why Barrett was investigating Slater before his death. It doesn't explain why Slater kept evidence of the murder for 2 decades instead of turning it in. And it certainly doesn't explain why the murder weapon was hidden on his property." The jury deliberated for just 7 hours before returning their verdict on April 18, 2021, guilty on all counts. Slater was convicted of first-degree murder, obstruction of justice, evidence tampering, conspiracy to distribute controlled substances, and corruption under color of authority. At the sentencing hearing 2 weeks later, Charlotte Barrett addressed the court. Her 3 children, now adults, stood behind her as she faced her husband's killer for the first time since his arrest. "For 22 years, you looked me in the eye and promised you were doing everything possible to find Silas's killer," she said, her voice steady, despite the tears streaming down her face. "You sat at our dinner table. You attended my children's graduations. You hugged me at memorial services. And all the while, you were the monster who took him from us." Judge Eleanor Simmons sentenced Slater to life imprisonment without possibility of parole, plus 40 years for the additional charges. "This court has never seen a more profound betrayal of public trust," she declared. "You used your position not just to commit crimes, but to actively subvert the justice system designed to solve them." As news of the verdict spread through Lexington, the community's reaction was complex. Relief mixed with shock, closure with renewed grief. Impromptu gatherings formed outside the police station. People left flowers, candles, and notes for the Merritt family. "Finding out it was Slater was like being punched in the gut," said longtime Lexington resident Howard Miller. "This wasn't some criminal from outside. This was someone we trusted, someone we respected. It makes you question everything." For the officers of the Lexington Police Department, the revelation created a profound crisis. Many had worked alongside Slater for years, considering him a mentor and friend. Some had begun their careers after his retirement, but had grown up hearing stories of his dedication to solving the Merritt case. There was anger, confusion, betrayal, said Chief Davis. Officers questioning their judgment, wondering how they missed the signs, asking if they could ever trust their instincts again. The department underwent a period of intense soul-searching. Chief Davis initiated a comprehensive review of all cases Slater had touched during his career, particularly those involving the Cabrera cartel. Dozens of convictions were re-examined. Several were overturned due to evidence tampering or procedural violations. More significantly, the case prompted structural reforms within the department. New oversight protocols were established, including regular forensic audits of evidence handling and random reviews of case files. Officers were required to work in rotating partnerships to prevent isolated corruption. Financial disclosures became more stringent with regular reviews of officers' finances by external auditors. Barrett's murder exposed vulnerabilities in how we operate, Davis explained at a town hall meeting 6 months after the verdict. We are rebuilding this department with transparency and accountability at its core so that no officer can ever again use their position to commit crimes or cover them up. The case also led to technological upgrades. The department implemented advanced evidence tracking systems with biometric access controls. Body cameras became mandatory for all officers. Digital forensics capabilities were expanded. An anonymous reporting system was established for officers to flag suspicious behavior among colleagues. For the Barrett family, the conviction brought a measure of closure but couldn't erase 2 decades of pain. Knowing the truth doesn't bring Silas back, Charlotte told reporters after the sentencing. But it means the man who took him from us can't hurt anyone else that matters. Merritt children, now in their 30s with families of their own, established the Detective Miles Barrett Foundation for Police Integrity. The organization provides resources for departments implementing anti-corruption measures and supports whistleblowers within law enforcement. Dad died because he was willing to expose corruption, even when it implicated a fellow officer, said Annie Barrett at the foundation's launch. We want to create a world where officers can do that safely, where the system protects the honest and exposes corrupt. In November 2021, on the 23rd anniversary of Barrett's murder, Lexington unveiled a permanent memorial in front of the police headquarters. The bronze statue depicts Barrett in uniform, notebook in hand, embodying the dedicated investigator he was. The plaque reads simply, Detective Miles Barrett, 1956-1997. He sought truth no matter the cost. The case continues to resonate throughout law enforcement nationwide. Policies now use it as a case study in corruption detection and prevention. The FBI's Quantitative Analysis Unit cites the Merritt investigation when promoting the importance of continued technological advancement in forensic science. What happened in Lexington could happen anywhere, noted FBI Director Christopher Palmer during a 2022 conference. Thelison isn't just about one corrupt officer. It's about building systems resistant to corruption, where no badge is beyond scrutiny and no case is beyond solving. Before I close this story, I want to ask you subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Each day I bring you cases like Detective Merritt's, stories of justice delayed but not denied, of truth emerging from darkness, of the human cost of crime, and the relentless pursuit of answers. Your subscription helps me continue this work and build this community of people who believe every victim deserves to have their story told. And speaking of community, I'm curious, what's the weather like where you are today? Drop it in the comments below. It's always fascinating to see how this channel connects people across different places, all united by our interest in true justice. While you're typing that out, I'll be researching our next case, knowing that somewhere out there, another truth is waiting to be revealed.